And I followed a little bit the organizers when they were organizing things, and it is such a tremendous job that they've been doing. So thank you all so much for putting this together, because it's been a very stressful job at times, and uh, it's yeah, thank you so much, first of all. So first of all, I want to give a talk about research that I've done called Through the Yellow Gate, and it's about transgender and intersex people in the Buddhist Vinaya, the monastic code, and especially because they're often said that they cannot ordain. And I want to relay that and to show the world that yes, they can ordain. There is really nothing against it. So let me first introduce myself a little bit. My name is Vimala. I been born in the Netherlands. I grew up in a very, I'm identify as non-binary, and I grew up in an environment that was very open and accepting. So in my naivety, I thought the rest of the world was like that as well. Of course, it isn't. And I found that out, especially in Buddhism, unfortunately. And um, so when I came to Buddhism and I found these beautiful teachings, I felt very inspired. There is nothing in the Buddhist teachings that I could see that is in any way discriminating on the basis of sex and gender or anything. It's just um, about developing the mind in a wholesome way, and that's for everybody. It doesn't matter who you are or where you were born or how you identify or what your sexuality is. It's for everybody, and that really appealed to me as well. Of course, like in the meditation center I went, they had like separate section for men and women, which I found a little bit strange, but okay, when you just come to these teachings, you take that all for granted. It's like, well, okay, this is the way they do it here. They probably have a good reason for that, so we'll accept that. And then I wanted to ordain, and that was a whole different matter. I went to Burma, and I wanted to ordain as a, well, I had not much choice being female, as a Buddhist nun. And then I found out that that was not the same as the monks, as the men. They would get an ordination, like a full ordination as a monastic bhikkhu. And for the women, that was simply not available. And after some years, I heard about Ajahn Brahm and that he ordained women as fully ordained monastics as well, so as bhikkhunis. So I felt very inspired by that. So I really wanted to become this a bhikkhuni as well and practice the Buddhist teachings. And then I found out that, yeah, in theory, there is that equality, but in practice, there's still a huge gap in everything, in both spiritual and material support, for instance. But then I also found out something else, is that people who are intersex or transgender people are not allowed to ordain at all. And that didn't make sense to me, because in the Buddhist teachings, that doesn't, there's no reason at all why that would apply, why that would make any sense. So what I did is I wanted to do some research on that, and it's taken some time. Um, First of all, I talked to people and say like, well, why do you think this is so? Why do you think that they can't ordain? And they pointed to this area in um, these two rules in the Vinaya, in the monastic code, that said that there's two words there, the Pandaka and the Ubatabhyanyanaka, that they are not allowed to ordain because they're said to be sexually deviant. Well, that didn't sound to me like intersex and transgender people, to be honest. So the translations in English of these words are eunuch and hermaphrodite. And those translations were done like over 100 years ago, at a time when there was nothing much known about these the Pali text. They started translating this ancient text into English, based on probably also Chinese translations, and I'll come back to that as well. So I was wondering, it's like, well, any translation holds some kind of judgment, some kind of interpretation of a word. And of course, 100 years ago, England is not exactly the same as India 2,500 years ago. So I wanted to look at, like, okay, where did these words come from? What did I really mean? What did it mean to people 2,500 years ago? Not now, but 2,500 years ago. So I went back into the text and I found the word Pandaka back in pre-Buddhist texts in the Vedic mythology. And there is actually a couple of words that's sort of overlapping in meaning. And there's an umbrella word called Napumsaka, which means neither man nor woman. It's also sometimes translated as the third sex. And this Pandaka, they had a couple of characteristics. So there was emasculation, but also wearing traditional female clothes and engaging in song and dance. It was actually more, they were religious seekers. They were some kind of sect of worshipping an androgynous god, the androgynous form of Lord Shiva, called Ardhanarishvara, and I hope I pronounced that correct for the Hindi speakers here. So this god was like, they were trying to emulate that god, to be like this god on earth, to be their representatives of this god. And so that's a very, very different concept from transgender people. So what we do have nowadays in India is the Hara, and I suspect that they are the transcendents from this group of people. Of course, the Hara, after 2,000 years, there have been a lot of changes as well, a lot of influences from Muslim, from Christians, etc., that have, and also modern day influences. So even though nowadays they identify as transgender, I'm not entirely sure if that identification is really correct, or because people become Hara not just because they have this strong longing inside themselves, or feeling inside themselves that they are not in the right body or something like that. It can also be because people are poor and they want to have some kind of livelihood, and this is one way of doing it. It can be all kinds of reasons. So, but I'll show you a few pictures here. Okay, so can you see my screen? I think if you don't, somebody will shout out. Okay. So this is a picture of that god, goddess, Vishvara, that's the form of Shiva. And here's a few more artist drawings. One of the things that it shows is that it's half man, half woman, and sort of split in the middle. But in the mythology, in the Vedic mythology, pre-Buddhist Vedic mythology, you also find a whole lot of other androgynous forms, shapes, and variations. And here is a picture of Hara. Of course, this is a picture, so it's from the last 100 years somewhere. And here more modern day Hara, very colorful, very beautiful. Okay. Okay, so what we get after that, it's like, okay, this is like pre-Buddhist. Now, what happened in the time of the Buddha? In the Buddhist suttas, there's nothing much you can find about this at all. People are just regarded as people, and everybody can practice the Buddhist teachings and become enlightened. So uh, if we go to what happened actually there after the time of the Buddha, um, what we find is that after the time of the Buddha, when the Buddha died, there was a lot of confusion. Um, there was no more leader to tell people what is right and wrong, or how they should do things. So what happened is that there was a lot of influences from the other people at that time, especially the Brahmanic caste, which was a very important spiritual caste at the time, as well as the Jain, which was a very significant group as well. Um, and the reason that became important is also because these are alms mendicants, like the Buddhist monks are alms mendicants. So they depend for their livelihood on the population. And that depends a lot on how they are seen by the population. So there is a significant pressure from what people think should be done, or how people should practice, and which people should ordain and which shouldn't. So, and especially in the Jain tradition, what we are seeing is that the there was an argument within the Jains, and this argument revolved around women and whether or not women can reach enlightenment. And so this is the Jain sect, right? Not a Buddhist one, but it hasn't had an influence, definitely. And what happened is that in this argument, they started to look at, like, okay, what exactly then are the characteristics of a woman, and what are the characteristics of a man? And that's not like how you would and me would probably define that, but they would also say, for instance, long hair is a characteristics of a woman. So if attraction to for a man to be attracted to another man sexually is also a characteristic of a woman. So you have the typical, yeah, the people that fit into the category woman, and the people that fit into the category man, and then there's this whole category in between that don't fit anywhere. And then it was said that these people are not allowed to ordain in the Jain tradition. And this has also made its way into, in the first 100 years after the Buddha died, it has made its way into the Vinaya as well and was laid down. Now, what we further see happening in the Jain tradition is that over the centuries, that rule gets relaxed more and more and more. And after a while, everybody's allowed to ordain. But in the Buddhist text, they were codified and they were basically not changed anymore. So there this rule stayed. So the Pandaka was not allowed to ordain. And then what you get next is literally a game of Chinese whispers. It's the texts went to various parts of the world and also to China, and there they were translated. And I noticed that the translation for the word Pandaka was made up of two characters, or two Chinese characters, yellow and gate. I was like, what's this? I mean, yellow gate? What does that mean? So I started looking into this, and I found out that it's a very interesting history. Of course, these texts go to China, and there's a scribe there who has to translate that, doesn't know the concept of a Pandaka in India, what that means, and starts comparing it to something he knows within his own environment. And what you see in China is that there were Imperial Eunuchs, and yellow was the color of the emperor. Nobody else was allowed to use yellow. And there was this yellow gate in front of the palace, and that was this sort of status symbol. And the only persons who were allowed to go through that gate was the emperor himself, his wives and concubines or whatever was living in the palace, and all the males that were supposed to go to that palace and work there were eunuchs. So they were compared with those eunuchs. So I'll show you a couple of pictures of that too. So here you see some of the imperial eunuchs doing their job at the palace. It's an artist drawing. And this is a picture from, I believe, 1903, where the eunuchs are accompanying the emperor. So the Chinese eunuchs have been around, imperial eunuchs have been around for many millennia, actually. And the man that you see here at the bottom is the last eunuch of China. So after that, the empire is no more. So also the eunuchs have disappeared. And then that word for eunuch, that yellow gate, is brought to Europe, and in the beginning of the last century, that was translated then as eunuch in English, and from that people conclude that anybody like transgender people are therefore not allowed to ordain. So you can see how this whole mess changed into something it didn't mean at all. And actually, originally, even the Pandaka was allowed to ordain. There was no problem with that at all. But throughout ages, yeah, like Chinese whispers, things start rolling, and there's a lot of prejudice involved. But yeah, it's perfectly okay to ordain for transgender people. So I'm coming to the Ubata Vijnana, which is often translated as hermaphrodite, and that's often linked then to intersex people, which of course is already not quite right. So I looked into that as well, and that word doesn't actually appear in pre-Buddhist text, or it appears only in the Buddhist text. But in the commentaries, it gave a very interesting description of these Ubata Vijnanikas, namely that they can shapeshift. They can decide, like, oh, today I want to be female with the female genitals and everything, and being able to get a baby as a female, and tomorrow I want to be a male again, and they can just do that. And it's like, that doesn't sound like very human to me. So although that word itself didn't actually appear anywhere else than in the Buddhist scriptures, the concept appears in the pre-Buddhist mythology. It happens very often that gods just shapeshift based on what they feel like. It happens that they put spells on people and make them shapeshift. All kinds of really interesting and weird stories. And I'd really, if you're advise you to read some of that, because it's vastly interesting. And I think you have to note as well that all these texts were written and told by men, by cis heterosexual men most of the time. So yeah, you have to take this with a grain of salt, but this is how powerful mythology is in shaping how we see the world even today. So that's also like hermaphrodite is probably a fairly reasonable translation, but it's not the same as intersex. So what I believe is that this is a purely mythological being that doesn't exist in real life. And when you look at the Vinaya in the monastic code, where these rules appear that these are not allowed to ordain, there is another mythological being mentioned, namely the Naga. So that's this shape-shifting dragon who can become a human and can become a dragon whenever they please. So there's this lovely story with this monk who was this shape-shifting Naga, but he was like shape-shifted into a man, and at night when he was asleep, he lost control of this, and he became this dragon again, and all the coils came out of his little house, and people noticed that he was actually a dragon. So that those are also not allowed to ordain. But again, this is all mythology. So that's how the mythology ended up in this monastic code. So yeah, so where did we take that from here? And so there's also some other arguments to be said for the ordination of intersex and transgender people that also Professor B. Shearer has been working on to show that this is part of the Indian Catuskoti system, which basically means is you're either A and B, or neither A and B. So it's a philosophical system, basically. So you either man, woman, neither man or woman, or both men and woman. That's basically the last two are the Pandaka and Ubhata Janaka. So that might also have played a part. But no matter how you are looking into this, there is no reason at all for transgender people and intersex people not to ordain. Of course, how I've talked to that with several monks, and they were not, although they agreed, there was also these questions like, oh, where should they then ordain? Should they ordain in, like, if a transgender person, when is somebody going to ordain? Yes, in a monk's monastery, and when in a nun's monastery, because we still stuck with this whole binary system, which actually comes from 2,500 years ago. So that's not very conducive for a whole lot of people. So that's something we still need to look into on how we're going to make that work. It's my conviction that the monastic sangha, the male monastic sangha for monks, has been set up very much as a safe space for cis heterosexual men, and that it is not really working for anybody else. So yeah, there's still a lot of work to be done. I just want to give you, let me see. Where is that? Oh, here we are. No. This is on academia.edu. You can find the whole of this research and also all the references there. There's some very interesting references there with there's one called Women, Androgens and Other Mythological Beasts, which is vastly interesting. So yeah, I will put that link in a minute. I can't copy it from here, so I'll put it in the chat in a minute. And this is the monastery where I am. So this is our logo, and we try to be open for all people who have no real, who feel it's difficult in other monasteries, for all LGBTQIA plus, as well as women who have difficulty finding a place. So that's that. Okay, let me get you that link. Here we are. Oh, somebody already put it there. Sorry. Thank you, Bantasunyo. All right, so we still have a few minutes if there's any questions. Everybody's silent. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. Okay.
I think there is one question. So, well, do you want to speak up?
So I saw a question earlier because there's so many on the chat that I didn't read all of them, but yeah, there's one from Banda Sumino. In the Theravada tradition in particular, there tends to be strict adherence to ordination statements and the idea that one must ordain as a bhikkhu or bhikkhuni. How does one navigate that if they themselves are trans or intersex? And how could one support such an ordination as an ally? Yeah, that's something that's still very difficult. There's a lot of, I found from, especially from the monk side, there is more opposition than from the nuns. Of course, yeah, Theravada tradition has traditionally also been very conservative. And there are good parts to that and bad parts. And the good part is, of course, that the texts have remained unaltered for a very long time. So we still have the Buddha's words. But yeah, the bad part of that is, of course, yeah, can we change to more modern conditions? And that, I think that's something we really need to discuss, and I don't have all the answers there. For myself as well as non-binary, I don't particularly feel happy in either. I feel, yeah, more at ease at the moment with the bhikkhunis, because there are also several non-binary bhikkhunis, and they also, yeah, I had a lot more, well, I wouldn't say that, but I had a lot of support from them in any case. So, but yeah, it remains a difficult situation, and I'd rather see a monastery that can accept both. And Bante Sunyo said, can I ask a question? Yes. You want to unmute yourself? Yeah.
Yes, Venerable, thank you very much for the talk. It's a important topic, I feel, because I think it's very important that anybody who has the intention to ordain should be felt welcome and given the opportunity to ordain. And I'm very thankful for your research. I think it shows that also non-binary people can indeed ordain. And actually, my question was sort of asked by Venerable Sumino already. How can you support it as an ally? So I think, yeah, I think the question has already been answered to some extent. So I just want to, no, I don't really have a question anymore. I just want to show my support, and hopefully in the future there will be more places for everybody of all kinds of orientations to ordain.
Thank you very much, Bante. Yes, I think it might be good to do, maybe if there is some kind of discussion, and I think it's very important to involve the monks in that. And Helen also asked, have you had a discussion with senior monks about it? Yes, I have, especially about ordination of transgender. The first reaction was, well, nobody has asked, so we're not going to think about that issue. And then my reaction was like, well, nobody's asked because they think that they won't be allowed. So they don't want to bring up that topic, and they have like this fear towards that. And there seems to be sort of this particular monk that I talked to, and I won't mention the names because, of course, you cannot, as a monk, decide something on behalf of the whole community. But he was quite open to the idea if somebody, a transgender man who was fully transitioned, so also had the operations necessary for that, would come and live in the monk's monastery. but anything before that, he was not very keen on, and he felt quite, yeah, he was holding back quite a bit. So I think this discussion really needs to be held, and maybe somebody has to be brave and just ask and go to a monastery and say, like, hey, I'm transgender, I want to ordain. Actually, I also had a discussion with a senior monk in Thailand, who is also, some of you might know him, Shine Viradamo, and he's a gay activist in Thailand. And he said it happens in Thailand that transgender men ordain as monks, but there is some kind of feeling of yeah, don't ask, don't tell, basically. So it's not really accepted, but they sort of, yeah. The other way around is more difficult, also because I think the Bhikkhuni lineage is so young still in the Theravada tradition that Bhikkhunis are a bit more reluctant to do anything that rocks the boat. So there it's probably more difficult to accept a transgender woman to ordain as a. But I think also probably a lot of transgender people might not feel quite comfortable in such an environment where that is strictly male or strictly female, no matter whether they transitioned or not. So yeah, that's another thing that would have to be discussed, I think.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me see. I'm going over time a little bit, but okay. I can always take a little bit of the meditation. So are there any relatively recent cases of a monastic transitioning in any Buddhist system and keeping their vows, in case you know of any? I don't know any that have transitioned after they have ordained. So no, I'm afraid not. There is a case in the Vinaya itself, actually, which is quite interesting. Which is I'm not entirely sure how it would work, because of course 2,500 years ago they did not have hormone therapy, they did not have operations and things like that. So this is a case of a monk who is with a friend, and the monk just wakes up one day and finds that he's suddenly a woman. And that basically means like physically female. And then in the commentaries, there's this lovely passage where his friend consoles him. It's like, oh, it's like we can bring you to the nuns' monastery, and then he can go, or she can go to the nuns' monastery. And there's also the opposite case of a nun who suddenly becomes a monk. That is often in the commentaries also linked to karma. So like being a male is better karma than being a female. So if you had good karma as a female, then you suddenly wake up one day and you find that you have a male body, and or the other way around. So it's a bit where it comes from and how this is originated, I don't know, but it's interesting how people thought in those days. But yeah, what is most interesting about that passage is that there is no value judgment to that. It's like, okay, this has happened, then you just go to the inner monastery. And that's it. There's no like, oh, you're a bad person or something. So, but yeah, in modern day, I don't know if there's any that have transitioned in while being ordained. Val from the USA said, were Chinese eunuchs created? They were in the Catholic Church, at least in the 20th, maybe earlier centuries. Well, the Chinese eunuchs go back to at least the Han Dynasty. So that's like 2,000 years. Created, yes, well, their purpose is obvious. It's like only the emperor would be the only male who can procreate in the palace, and all the other men cannot. So their harem or whoever females are there are safe from that. So that's the reason for the Chinese eunuchs being created. Yes, it definitely. I also actually found an interesting little article from a Catholic nun, a transgender nun, who also wrote about eunuchs in the Catholic Church, and basically says the same thing, and as I've done throughout this. Yeah, there are similarities in the history between these things. Yeah, do you know examples of currently ordained trans or intersex people? Not intersex people, trans people, only from what I've heard in Thailand. And if you then, yeah, of course, myself being non-binary, that also counts as a form of trans. But and there are several other bhikkhunis that also identify as non-binary. So in that sense, you can say it's like, yes, there are some that have come out after they have ordained, but other than that, I don't know.